So I have here, so I'm Nadia Webster and I'm working in the Wellington City Council in New Zealand's capital. And I have here Stephen Davies, who works in the resource consents team, but also has a degree in software development. So we're bringing him into this piece of work. And Hamish Dean over here, who's a resource consent team lead, and so is our subject matter expert in resource consent space. So I'm just going to flick through to a presentation. Share to my presentation here. And, okay, so hopefully you can all see this. So we did a proof of concept over 6 weeks. This included this Hamish here, but also Hamish Fraser. So there were 4 of us, as you can see on the bottom of the slide. There were 4 of us in the room, 2 Hamishes and a Tim and a Nadia. And we were trying to test an approach to improve the quality of resource consent applications. I'll transcript through this quite quickly because I'm sure that people want to have a discussion. The reason we called this proof of concept rubric is because we made it up, but a rubric is actually like a matrix for doing an assessment of something. We made up this acronym, basically a rules-based tool that results in improved consents. So we wanted to test the desirability of that and that technical feasibility. Hamish and I and Pia and a few others have spent a bit of time looking at the approach of using rules as code and seeing if that actually improves not just the service delivery side, but the approach that we use is having a multidisciplinary team and working through the logic of the rules that you're trying to use as part of your service delivery, and as part of doing that and the approach that you take by working out that logic, and because everybody comes from their different domains and their domain-specific understanding, you work through that logic and you actually start to understand a little bit more about the rule set and whether it is actually delivering on the policy intent. And as Hamish Fraser and I found, a district plan is quite a complicated rule set. So I'll just quickly skip through here. This was kind of what we were aiming for. So it was a tool that would help people to be guided through the resource consent process, helps them inform them and make them feel confident that they're providing the right information. And then for council staff, again, it's about having the right information being provided to them. So a real differentiating thing for this proof of concept, as opposed to just sort of having an online application process where people just fill in the form and then send you their application, we were really focusing on how to improve the quality of the application to make sure that it was properly targeted at the types of activities that people wanted to do, and that they were thinking about the right things and not wasting their time and putting in applications that didn't cover the right information. So under the Resource Management Act in New Zealand, the sort of the crux of an application for planning is the policy statement that you'll make with a assessment of environmental effects. And so as you run through the rules of the district plan to work out what it is that you whether you're able to do what you want to do on a piece of land, it will help to target your application in your, I'm not describing this terribly well, but I'm sure a lot of the planners in the room understand. But essentially that complicated rule set, which could be 1,000 rules, you need to be able to narrow it down to just the rules that apply to the property and the activity that you're working with. So we did a proof of concept, which I'll show you in a moment, but a really important thing is when we showed it to we showed it to about 3 people outside of council, just to sort of see what their response was, and the homeowner, who is what we'd call a novice applicant, wanted to remind us that we need some empathy with the fact that they're not just sort of a number and not just engaging with council as part of the process, but it is their home, their house. So we should understand that. So here is our proof of concept. There are two parts to this. So it is both an interface and a rules engine sitting behind it. What I was going to do is I'll give a little run through of this, and then I think I'll pass over to Hamish Fraser to talk a little bit more about technically what we've done here. So essentially this whole idea is you need two things to determine what rule set, or two key things to determine what rule set that applies to you, or what the cut down version of the district plan rule set applies to you. So what activity that you are undertaking and what location. I always go to this location because I flattered there as a student. So this is just drawing on an ArcGIS API endpoint that already exists for the council, and it brings back information about the property. And then we can go into this bit here where we determine the compliance of the property, of what it is you wanted to do. So we took the rules and standards in the district plan, and we looked at the standards and thought, what is the question that you're trying to answer when the standard says for the zone that you're in, the maximum building height is, say, 8 metres. So we tried to work out a way to extract the information that would normally be provided in a drawing or a plan document, but getting it provided as data. And so we might say that the height of the building is 9 metres and the roof slope is, say, 15. We know that what we weren't aiming for in our proof of concept was the best user experience, and we recognise that the language that's being used here is representing representing the language that's used in the district plan. We didn't really have time to make sure that it was much more plain English. But the other aspect of it is that if we were to reinterpret what the plan says, and there's a little bit of a legal liability there, that through our questions we are adding another layer of interpretation. So we have to be careful with that as well. So this one here about building recession planes is an example of a question where it cannot be the answer can't be calculated. So you might have gone to an architect and got them to work out what that imaginary polygon is that goes around your building that you want to build, so the building recession envelope, and they help you to determine whether you breach that building recession envelope or not. So in this case we'll say yes, we do breach it, and the breach is 1 metre. And then there's this third question that we've got where we ask the question about the site coverage of the building. So we'll say it's 40%, and this question below here is only showing up because of the zone, the particular zone that the property is in. And we'll say, yes, we do have an uncovered deck, and that it equates to 5% of the site coverage. So over here, we now come up with the results, and what it has said is that it's permitted the height that I've put in. Now, if I was to say, actually, I want the building to be 10 metres, then that changes that to saying that it's a discretionary restricted rule that we've hit. And if we click on that, that brings up the actual rule from the district plan. And it's saying that it's applying this additional condition, and that the matters for discretion for this, so the things that we have to, when we put together our AEE, or our assessment of environmental effects, this is what we have to say how we're going to address these things, so that the council can make an informed decision as to whether they're going to allow us to breach that rule. And then we go down to the next rule that we have a calculation for, and that's looking at saying that it's also discretionary restricted, and that at the site coverage level, saying that yes, we're permitted for that because of the uncovered decks rule. Now, as I said, we didn't work tireless. We didn't have a lot of time, so we didn't work hard on trying to make this the best user-friendly interface for somebody who isn't familiar with the way that the plan works. So we've got some good ideas about how to, from the user testing that we did do, or the user interviews we did, we've got some ideas about how to make this a lot more user-friendly to somebody who doesn't understand the language of the plan. So then the idea is that you can go into an application form and have some of this information pulled over into your application form to help guide you through that. Hamish Fraser, do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, if you leave this screen up, I can just talk to that.
Okay.
So just technically what we did for this one was we just replicated the rules into a pseudo JavaScript engine, so we could just run it in the browser, because we only had 18 days to understand the plan and code up the interface and get something up. So we were on a tight time scale. The parts that were really fascinating from my perspective, and perhaps I'll just start off just saying too that to reiterate on what Nadia said, the work I'm involved with within central government here in New Zealand is what we call better rules, and the central concept behind that is this idea of a multidisciplinary team sitting around the table to establish what rules they want to develop or what the rules mean, and as part of that, explaining the rules to a computer, and that aspect of it is not really magic. It's just leveraging the complete unassuming and context-free state that the computer exists in. And once we start trying to explain these rules to a computer, we start to find interesting holes and gaps and things that we've missed as humans and assumed. So that, I think that's important just to sort of prefix perhaps where I'm coming from in terms of this work. So once we arrived at this work and we realized we had to derive these questions from the plan, and also create a tree-like structure for the rules, in that they pertain to particular sections, and we needed to break them down based on zones and things like that, activities. It got quite interesting looking at the question hierarchy and thinking about that from a district plan design perspective. How would it impact the design process if we were starting to think, while we were developing the plan, what questions we were actually going to be putting in front of people, and were they going to be easily consumable questions, and were they going to be overly complex, or were there particular questions we could ask straight up front which would block out other questions based on the responses? And so we had a hint of that while we were looking at this, and that was interesting to try and understand how to map that out. The other aspect too was creating the rules, and running the rules and getting the results from the rules created this interesting effect that we've got here on the right, which is showing, say with the maximum height one that we're looking at the moment, we've got a permitted rule there, that's 517, which we have not met. And so for somebody new to the Resource Management Act, what I'd love to see this develop further would be perhaps a bit better explanation of the states of the Resource Management Act in terms of activities that we have in New Zealand, which is, you go through a series of stages. It's either permitted because it fits within the standard, or it steps into discretionary restricted or discretionary controlled. And so there's a series of these that escalate in a way, if you will, and return basically what the consequences of where you're trying to head is going to be. And so we're only showing a small subset here of all the rules that got triggered when we implemented the height question. And so that was an interesting area to consider too, in terms of which information is most usable to the user in terms of understanding why they've got the result they have. And so we excluded all of the heights that applied to other zones, because there were all these rules that immediately run as well, that compute to the other zones, and they were obviously of no use to this person because they were just looking in this particular zone. So trying to understand, we were lucky enough to sort of be able to logically hazardly make our way through displaying just the ones we've got there. But thinking about that at a deeper level is one of my next challenges in terms of understanding how can we feed back to people what's at play here, and of course also when it says what is the maximum height of the building in meters, there's an implied limit in that, and the ability to display what that limit is, and what the before they even answer the question, could be useful for people not applying for a resource consent, but trying to understand what they could do in their property. So this tool could have that alternative use of, if I was to build on my property, what is the maximum height that I can get away with? They might not be ready to apply for a resource consent, but they would totally use this tool to select their zone and their property and find out what the rules are that actually apply. So that's hidden at the moment, and that information is there though, and we could supply it. In this situation, it's not an easy answer. The maximum height is also dependent on the roof slope, because you get an extra meter if you have a roof slope of more than 15 degrees. So weighing up all of these dynamics that are in play there is a really fascinating exercise. Nadia, have I gone on for too much?
No, that's fine. I was just going to sort of point out that, so what we're doing now is I'll just stop sharing there for a minute. So what we're doing now is we're looking at scoping out the next phase. We've presented a lot to people inside the council. They like this idea. The Wellington City Council is now in the early stages of doing its district plan review. And so the existing plan has been around since the year 2000. It's had about 85 changes since then, but they're going to do a significant review of the whole document. And as we were saying before, the approach around the Better Rules approach is bringing this multidisciplinary team together and working on the rules as they're developed. Now, the concept of coding them, and we did this for our proof of concept as well, and getting your policy expert or subject matter expert to write the test suites to check either that the code is working or that their understanding of what the rules logic is correct. So that is an approach that we could use theoretically while the development of the new rule sets is occurring. So, and there's been other examples of this that Hamish and I have both been involved in different use cases, but that concept of writing those use cases, writing the code, explaining the complicated rule set to, as Hamish puts it, the dumb computer, means that you do have to explore the logic of this. So at this stage, we're between now and Christmas, we're scoping out how much work it would be to do two things. One is, can we ring fence a section of the existing plan and turn that into rules as code, so that we could have sometime next year something like our proof of concept that helps people to produce better quality applications. Two aspects to that. One is creating all of the content of the district plan, which is currently a document, turning that into linked data, and then also separately having a rules engine with the coded logic of the rules separately available, and having both of those available as an API, meaning that you could create new types of user interfaces that you wanted. So we were working out whether we can ring fence a section of the existing plan, and also determining whether we could use this approach as a tool for the development of the new plan. So we'll be running some more experiments in November around those two things, and gearing up to be able to explain to the council sort of what it would mean to take these ideas forward. And an underlying design premise that we're going with is that Hamish and I are trying to establish capability within the council to do this themselves. So tapping into their own development teams and their own subject matter experts to build that capability to be able to run their own rule sets in this way. So what we're trying to explore at this point is, what are the capabilities, what are the right languages, what are the right tool sets to be doing this in, and the balance that Hamish is trying to, and he can talk about this a little bit more, the balance he's trying to get right now is, what is the right tools to be using for the rules engine and for the linked data approach to the district plan, what's the right thing for the rule set, but also what's the right thing for the internal teams and that sustainability of this over the longer term. Do you want to talk a bit about that, Hamish?
Yes, and also I completely missed out test suites.
Yeah.
So thanks for mentioning those. We did build like an extensive test suite for what we did. There was about 110 tests I think we ended up with for the building height question. And they do perform an excellent service in terms of being a bridge between the subject matter experts and the code.
Sorry to interrupt, just for the non-programmers, is it possible to explain what a test suite is?
Yeah, so
you can visualize it.
So a test suite is basically, given this scenario, this is the expected outcome. So in this situation, given the height is 9 meters and the zone is outer residential, the expected outcome is that is permitted. And so you just start to create sets of these, quite large sets of them, where you'd say, okay, well, what if it's 9.5 meters? What if it's 10 meters? What if it's 11 meters? What if the zone is in a residential? So you can start to imagine a matrix of scenarios starts to open up there. Once you've written those, you can then run them across the code, and the computer doesn't get bored doing those tests repeatedly and in large numbers, and it allows everybody to say, well, yeah, actually, the code is returning the correct results. That's exactly, as an expert, what I would say the answer was in that scenario. So does that help in terms of explain?
Yes, I think that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I've just shared, hopefully you can see that. Here is our test suites. So this is a rudimentary way of doing it in a spreadsheet. So this is for the maximum height rule. Here's a test, that's the standard number, the zone that we were testing against, particulars, and then what the input array is from a particular question, the result standard that it was testing against, and scroll across, and what we expect the answer to be, and and then a register as to whether that was done and whether it was passing. So at a simple level, this is what test suites are.
Yeah. Now what did you ask me to speak about before that?
Oh, right, about the conversation we're having at the moment about the
yes.
Yeah. So the technical solutions and the approach that we want to take. Yeah,
so at the moment we're facing down these two challenges. One is how do we publish the plan itself as data. So what I mean by that is, as a programmer, I want to be able to pluck out little parts of the plan and link specifically to them from my rules engine, so that I can say this rule here applies specifically to this part of the plan, to provide a sense of coherence. But bigger than that, if we were to publish the plan in that format, it would allow us to script and publish the PDF version which people want, to publish the web version which people want, and you can do that with a real sense of consistency. And so we're also looking at the longevity of these district plans. So this one's been 20 years basically in existence, and so is the next one going to be 20 years in existence, and what sort of base building blocks do we want to put this into? And one could put it into, say, a database and generate the documents and the different expressions of the plan from a database. The legal requirement is that there is a PDF, but it doesn't state how you get to having a PDF. Actually, that isn't quite true. I'm not quite sure actually what the legal definition is for the document, because they allow the e-plans now, don't they? So there's interesting questions around that, and there's questions around the fact that the laws might change in terms of what's required. So if the data of the district plan is contained in a format which is highly malleable from a computer programming perspective, it allows lots of options. The challenge, however, is the people who are going to be writing the plan are planners and consultants, and who are very familiar with Microsoft Word generally, Google Docs, track changes and that sort of thing. So we're looking at the process of how can we work with these tools and achieve, and what is our